Let's be honest, we see headlines about new studies every single day. One day coffee is good for you, the next it's not. So how do you tell the solid science from the shaky claims? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what to look for so you can figure out when a study is actually trustworthy. So picture this. You're scrolling online and a headline pops up that says, "New study proves chocolate makes you smarter." I mean, it sounds amazing, right? But is it true? How can you possibly tell if the research behind that awesome headline is for real? Well, the secret. It all comes down to something called the research design. The best way to think about it is like the architect's blueprint for a building. A really sturdy, well thought out plan that leads to a reliable building. It's the exact same in research. A strong design leads to a trustworthy answer. So the very first choice a researcher has to make is all about time. Are they just taking a quick snapshot of a single moment? Or are they keeping a detailed diary over a really long period? This brings us to two big approaches. On one side, you've got a cross-sectional study. That's our snapshot. It looks at a specific group at one single point in time. It's quick, it's efficient. On the other side, you have a longitudinal study, and that's the diary. This follows the very same people over weeks, months, or sometimes even years, tracking all the changes and developments along the way. And believe me, this diary approach can be incredibly powerful. A perfect example is the famous 7-Up TV series. I mean, they've been revisiting the same group of people every 7 years since 1964. It's given us this incredibly rich, deep understanding of how people change over a lifetime. That's the power of longitudinal research. But a good blueprint isn't just about the timing. Before any data gets collected, a researcher absolutely has to establish the ethical rules of the road. And this part, it is completely non-negotiable. Every good study is built on a foundation of respect. The design has to protect participants from any kind of harm, and it also has to protect the researcher too. And this is a big one. It has to avoid any kind of covert research where people don't even know they're being studied. All right, so the time frame is chosen, the ethical guardrails are in place, the blueprint is almost done. But now it has to prove that it's actually strong enough to work. The design has to run a gauntlet, so to speak. It's got to pass a whole series of tough quality tests. And this leads to the one fundamental question every single researcher must ask themselves. Is my work going to hold up under intense, critical examination? If the answer is no, well, it's right back to the drawing board. To pass that test, especially in quantitative research, you need two key things: reliability and validity. Let's make this simple. Think of a bathroom scale. If you step on it and it says you're 5 pounds heavier than you really are, and it does that every single time, well, it's reliable. It gives you a consistent result, but it's not valid because it's not accurate. A good study needs to be both. So let's look at reliability first. That's consistency. This can be thrown off by all sorts of things. For instance, if a participant is rushed, they might give sloppy answers. Or if someone is worried about being overheard, they might not be totally truthful. Hey, even a tired researcher can make mistakes. A good research design has to plan for all these potential problems. And what about validity, accuracy? This is just as tricky. An outside event could totally change how people feel. Let's go back to our chocolate makes you smarter study. What if, in the middle of it, a huge stressful project deadline gets moved up? That could change everyone's performance, and it would have nothing to do with the chocolate. Sometimes, just the act of being in a study can make people act differently. Or people might drop out over time. That's a threat called mortality, and that can completely skew the results. Okay, but this is where it gets a little more nuanced. For qualitative research, we're talking about things like in-depth interviews or observations that explore the why and the how. The ideas of reliability and validity don't really fit perfectly, so the terms get adopted a bit. So here's how those terms kind of shift. Instead of reliability, qualitative researchers talk about dependability. Basically, can the process be followed consistently? Instead of validity, they focus on credibility. Do the findings really ring true? And instead of trying to generalize to everyone, they aim for transferability. Can these insights apply in a different situation? So, knowing all of these potential pitfalls and traps, how do researchers actively build trust and actually prove their findings are solid? Well, one of the most powerful tools they have is called triangulation. The idea is actually pretty simple, but it's super effective. Don't rely on just one piece of evidence. Use multiple sources and multiple methods to see if they all point toward the same conclusion. So what does that look like in the real world? Well, a researcher might look at company documents, then conduct interviews with employees, and observe meetings. If the story from all three of those sources lines up, they can be way more confident in what they've found. It adds depth, richness, and a whole lot of credibility. Here's another great technique. Just ask. Researchers can take their interpretations back to the people they studied and say, hey, does this sound right? Does this accurately capture what you told me? This whole process is called participant validation, and it's a fantastic way to double-check for accuracy. And finally, we have to think about the researcher themselves. An external researcher, an outsider, has to work really hard just to get access and build trust. But an internal researcher, someone studying their own workplace, for example, has a totally different challenge. They know the context inside and out, but they have to be incredibly careful that their own biases and assumptions don't cloud their judgment. So when you get right down to it, a study that you can actually trust is never an accident. It is always the result of a long series of deliberate, ethical, and really rigorous choices that the researcher made every step of the way. And that brings us to the end. So the next time you see a flashy headline about some new study, you'll know what to look for. What's the first question you're going to ask about its design? Thanks for joining me.